Chapter 2 focuses on the social and cultural transformations and the rise of sport in North America, aka this is the history chapter. In the 1700s, Christianity placed restrictions on playing games in North America. There was little time for leisure during this time period. However, laws did not eliminate things like gambling, horse racing, shooting, running matches. People figured out ways in which to engage in these activities despite the restrictions. In the early 19th century, the factory system played a large role in terms of sport. Part of the reason for this was to socialize immigrants into American values as they came into the country and give them something to do on Sundays, their off day, so that they wouldn't get into trouble. Technology, in terms of large-scale manufacturing, helped create the development of the steam engine, steamboats, and railroads, which allowed people to move back and forth and allowed competitors to move across the country fairly quickly to compete in matches, tournaments, or games. In addition, things like the telegraph also helped disseminate sports news, and the improvement of the printing press and newspapers were growing, which fueled this interest in spectator sports, specifically horse racing. In the late 19th century, sport was used to create assertive, competitive men because people feel that society was becoming too feminine due to modernization. Therefore, there was widespread participation in sport, and athletic clubs became status symbols. So they were these elite private organizations that if you could afford to pay for, and you were white male primarily, you could be in these organizations and participate in sports with other people that looked like you and flaunt your wealth. Muscular Christianity was a movement that started in the late 1800s, in that they saw sport and physical activity as a way to keep people healthy, and so they tried to promote both Christianity and physical activity at the same time. Some other key components of the late 1800s were that the concept of social Darwinism was at its peak, the idea that only the strong survive, which focused on this concept that rich people were rich because they deserved to be through their hard work and aptitude, while poor people were poor because they're lazy, therefore they didn't deserve to get wealthy. These ideas still permeate sport and society, and we'll talk more about them as throughout the semester. Another component of that social Darwinism was the emphasis on competition and winning, which we can see is still quite prevalent in American society. The late 1800s also was the birth of intercollegiate athletics. Though sport was still thought to be too strenuous for women, and particularly white women were discouraged from participating for fields that would harm their reproductive health. And finally, African Americans, both men and women, had fewer opportunities due to segregation and restrictions placed on them. In the early 1900s, labor unions and businesses helped sponsor teams. This provided legitimacy to the organization, particularly if they were winning, and helped get their brand out there. In addition, sport became more commercialized due to improvements in technology like the printing press and radio, which also led to more information about pro leagues and the growth of spectator sports, so people became more invested in these leagues and wanted to go out and watch them, hence they spent money, hence the growth. Racial integration was also a key component of the early 1900s, when Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby integrated Major League Baseball in the late 1940s, and Chuck Cooper integrating the NBA. Unfortunately, at this time, women still had few opportunities to participate, particularly women of color. So the focus of the sports from the 1920s to the 1960s was on fitness and fair play. The focus of sports from the 1970s till now is almost always win at all costs, particularly at the elite, collegiate, and professional levels. The late 20th century focus switched due to arguably the fact that more money has become involved due to TV, media contracts, sponsorships, etc. One of the major things that happened in the late 20th century was Title IX. Title IX was passed in 1972 and it mandated all federally funded institutions provide educational opportunities for both men and women, which led to skyrocketing rates of female athletes at the high school and collegiate levels. In fact, in 1972, there were about 300,000 high school female athletes, and these days there are about 3.2 million high school female athletes, whereas boys' participation in the 70s and now is maintained at roughly 4.2 million. In the 21st century, sport has become a highly commercialized entity. These days, TV and media rights to events like March Madness, the Super Bowl, and the Olympics are astronomical. For example, a 30-second Super Bowl commercial costs well over $3 million. Youth sports have moved out of the parks and rec public programs in schools into elite private clubs, which, due to cost, present barriers to low-income families in terms of access and opportunities. In addition, sports have become PR tools for colleges to use to recruit and attract both student athletes and non-student athletes. Instead of using academic programs, graduation rates, and job placement, schools are now using wins and losses, championships, and the like to try to get students to attend their institution. Sports have become increasingly reliant on technology, things like VO2 max testing, heart rate monitors, blood testing, performance-enhancing drugs, and sleep chambers to ensure that athletes can compete at the highest level. So no longer is sport about the natural body. Instead, it's about pushing your body through technology to the ultimate limits. Finally, there's been a huge rise in esports or video gaming in which athletes, and we can debate whether or not these are athletes or should be considered athletes or not, have their own YouTube channels sponsored by companies on teams, and they get paid roughly $50,000 to $100,000 a year to play in tournaments. Sport has obviously changed drastically over the last couple of hundred years, from essentially being banned to permeating every aspect of society that generates billions of dollars in revenue.